All right, I say let's get started as people have taken time out of their busy schedule for this today, which is a very exciting opportunity. I will just begin us today by sharing that I'll be acting as producer and moderator. And when I say producer, that means that I'll be monitoring the chat. Others will also be monitoring the chat. And then I have Brian Mills here from a technical perspective who's working to make sure that we have the best experience possible. If you experience any freezing or anything like that, we just want to note that it could be your connection. You might want to try leaving and coming back in. Zoom, we know, is pretty overloaded during these times. We've had not many problems as long as we have good Wi-Fi. I'm using my own personal hotspot as to not compete with my teens, so that's kind of how I'm operating today. And I would like to now open it up and turn it over to someone who's really become a friend to me over the past 6 months. And his name is Dennis Littky, and he is the founder of Big Picture Learning and the Met School, and now the president of College Unbound. And College Unbound are our hosts today. And we'll do a little bit of, just to give you an understanding of who College Unbound is. And then we will get to our keynote. I'm going to call him the keynote today, our keynote, Daniel Pink. So let me turn it over to Dennis Littky, who is just an extraordinary person. So Dennis, will you take it away?
All right, welcome everybody. You probably didn't expect to see Santa today. When I woke up, I didn't know if it was December. I didn't know if it was Christmas in July. And the days and months just all go together. So what the hell? I put on my Santa costume to greet everybody. And I want to say that it is a special day, May Day. And besides the first day of spring, it's also International Workers' Day. So to send out my love to all the teachers and parents who are teaching their kids at home and working, and all the people on the front line. So keep up the good work for us. So CU is the newest college in Rhode Island. We were approved 5 years ago by the state. It's a college set up for adults and most who are returning to school at some time in their life. We work with a lot of individuals who come to us, but we also work inside businesses. So we're inside United Way. We're inside the Province Health Center. We bring a professor right there. The workers step out of their job at the end of the day, come into a room, and boom, they can help themselves be transformed and get their bachelor's degree. So 3 years ago, 3 months ago, I keep getting confused, we had a party at Lauren Adrian's house, his beautiful new mansion, and we brought together 25 businesses to say, let's bring College Unbound into your business so you can help your people transform themselves, move up in the business, and then boom, the COVID-19 hit. And that's when Michelle and myself and Julie DeBarry started talking. And Michelle was also furloughed. She's at IGT, head of their talent development there. And she said, we need something positive. We need not just keep talking about when are we coming out, what's happening, the sadness, but something to motivate the people in the business who lost their jobs, who are furloughed. And we started talking, and somehow Dan Pink's name came up. And then I said, wait, I'm good friends with Dan Pink. And she got all excited. And although the next series, the next events in the series are going to be local, we thought Dan would be great to start it off. And I met Dan about 15 years ago. A mutual friend of ours, Tom Peters, called me frantically and said, you and Dan Pink got to get together. Take a train to my house next Monday, and Dan's flying in. You guys got to meet. And Dan sent me the galleys of his book, The Whole New Mind, and it was fantastic. It just talked about the kind of ways that we think about education and that he thinks about education. And then he joined our board. Then his next book, Drive, was talking about what motivates people. And he talked about you got to have a purpose. and you got to have some autonomy, and then you got to have mastery. That's exactly what our schools are. So we connected more. And he's my best friend because he said we were one of the 5 schools in the country that followed that. So then his book, When, okay? And it's perfect timing for us right now. And I'm reading what, this is my introduction to him. Oprah says, the book I couldn't put down. Malcolm Gladwell says, provocative. And Forbes magazine says, radical, surprising, and undeniably true. So, and then when I looked at chapter 2, it's like he wrote this for us, Dan. Chapter 2 is starting right, starting again, and starting together. So we will go to, I got my little friend here, we'll go to Dan Pink and Michelle Saunders. Woohoo!
Thank you, Dennis. And for those of you that don't know Dennis, this is a great opportunity to get to know Dennis and all that Dennis is. So every time I brainstorm with Dennis, he throws something out there, and I think to myself, and I'm going to stop doing this soon, but I think to myself, okay, we'll see if that materializes. And then lo and behold, 2 days later, these ideas that he has materialize. And when he said he knew Dan Pink, I said, well, I'm sure he does. Let's see if Dan will come to the table. And sure enough, it happened. So just an example of just working with Dennis, which is amazing. So Dan, thanks so much for joining us today. This is truly very special. As Dennis mentioned, I am furloughed and certainly needed something to give me some inspiration during these times. So we are so grateful for you to be our special guest. And I, myself, as Dennis mentioned, I'm a talent development consultant, but I work at IGT presently. And whenever I facilitate leadership development workshops, and I'm not just saying this, I always quote the book Drive, and I always quote motivation. And I reference the essential elements, which are purpose, mastery, and autonomy. For all of us, and interestingly enough, a couple of people reached out to me, colleagues, and said, what is this about? You know, what is this talk? What's the topic? And I thought to myself, and I've tried to think about what this is. I think this is an opportunity for us to be inspired during these times, and to have someone who's very much like a keynote when those have been ripped away. For all of us, life has been ripped apart. For every single person, for the 84 people right now that are on this Zoom call, life has been ripped apart in some way. Something has been kind of stopped for what we formerly had. And specifically, I think purpose. What are we inspired and motivated to do? So do you have any thoughts on, and I know you're probably constantly thinking, thoughts on what all of this means for 2020?
Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for presuming that I'm always thinking, which is rarely the case. So let me just take a step back and say, I will answer your question, but I am such a fan of College Unbound. I think it's one of the most innovative programs in the country, and I think it's doing something that no other program is doing. And my hunch is that within X years, and I'm not sure whether that X is 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, you're going to see all kinds of folks who are going to be following something akin to the model that Dennis came up with. Because Dennis, as Michelle mentioned, Dennis is, if I could draw, I love charts more than anything in the world. If I were to draw a chart, I would draw kind of a Venn diagram of circles of Dennis is one of the most hardworking people I've ever seen. He works all the time. He's one of the most creative person I've ever seen. And he's also one of the most, what psychologists call pro-social, that he's really truly about doing good. And very rarely do those things come together. But when they do, you get something like College Unbound. So as to your question, Michelle, what should we be thinking about? You know what? I think we should be thinking about a lot of things. And I'll just tell you how, I'll tell you let me just toss out 2 ideas and then, see what you think of those, about a way to think about this. I think that at some level, what's going on now with COVID-19, and I'm talking to you, I'm in Washington, D.C. We have a shelter in place order that's been in place for, I think it's now 6 weeks. This is my office. It's my garage. I literally have not been more than 2 miles from my house in, I think, 6 or 7 weeks. You know, I have a 4-mile run where I go 2 miles out and 2 miles back, and that is as far away as I've gone. I have been working at home for 20 years. I have been social distancing for 50 years. And I'm still going loopy in this kind of arrangement. So it's really tough for everybody. But let me just go back to these 2 points. One, here's one thing I think is going on. I think that what's happening now is a great unmasking. I think it's a great unmasking of a lot of the problems that were hiding in plain sight, but that have now suddenly been revealed and we're forced to confront. Things like how precarious many jobs are. So you have this economy that's seemingly strong 2 months ago that suddenly brought down. That is not a sign of strength. That is not a sign of resilience in an economy. That's a sign of some fundamental cracks in the structure that were always there, but now we're seeing. One of the things that really alarmed me, I'll give you another example of this, was some of the reports that came out in just yesterday, in fact, showing that there were certain employees were getting paid more on unemployment than they were getting paid in their job. And you had some people, of certain political persuasions talking about how outrageous that was. And I look at it to the other end, the idea that there are 20-something states in this country that still have a $7.25 minimum wage. That's the thing that's horrible. So it's great unmasking, saying, oh my God, we have all these jobs out there where people can't even come close to providing for their family. When we think about how precarious our healthcare situation is, where we have this ridiculous system where healthcare is always attached to this thing that we call a job, suddenly that's been unmasked. We finally have, for the first time ever, people who are freelancers or self-employed getting unemployment insurance. So there's this great unmasking going on. We have, we knew all these things. When it comes to education, suddenly here in the District of Columbia, where I live, our mayor, we've had distance learning in DCPS, and the mayor ended the school year 3 weeks early because so many of the kids here in the nation's capital didn't have proper internet connections. It was a waste of time for them to do distance learning. That's a great unmasking. And so I think that there's a positive side of this, and that we're going to be forced to confront a lot of these issues in a way that we weren't forced to confront them. And what you see in some of these historical situations with national trauma, the Great Depression being one, is that in the aftermath of this, there were some things that changed. So I'm hopeful on that regard. Let me say one other thing, and then we'll go back to you. I also think there's a reason to be hopeful here as well. When we look at, 30 million people unemployed, to me is, I can't get over that. And I think that's just so staggering, and it's so horrible for so many families. However, there's something else going on here that I think could be marginally stirring for us, and it's this. If I had told you 6 months ago that we as a country, we're going to ask, there's going to be a problem, there's going to be a virus, there was going to be a health threat, and we were going to just ask people to close down their businesses, to shut down their restaurants, to shut down their barbershops, and we're going to ask families, we're going to say, we're going to shut down some schools, and we're going to say, everybody, you know what? For your sake, for the sake of your neighbors, for health's sakes, we'd like you to stay home. Not just for a day, not just for a week, but for 1 week, and 2 weeks, and 3 weeks, and 4 weeks. And you know what? We're not going to have troops in the street enforcing that. We're not going to have police officers on every corner threatening to gun people down who come out of their house. We're just going to rely on you to do this because it's the right thing to do. And so what pisses me off, forgive me, is that I see the photograph on the front page of the paper where there's like 5 armed guys in the Michigan legislature who don't want to comply with this. Meanwhile, there are 250 million people who are saying, yeah, I want to do the right thing. And so if you look at through the other end of the telescope, it's actually kind of extraordinary. You have nearly 300 million people who are doing the right thing for themselves and for their neighbors without any threat of force because it's the right thing to do. So that can make us, so if we deal with the unmasking and we actually look through the other end of the telescope and say, whoa, what an extraordinary thing. Look at everybody helping each other out. I think there are reasons to be optimistic. Optimism doesn't cure things, doesn't solve problems, but I think it's a necessary first step.
So for me, that as I facilitate, I also take things away. And for me, that last quote is so key. So optimism doesn't cure things, but it certainly helps us get through it. So on this, the 88 participants we have on right now is a mix of corporate and community leaders. And we have some from College Unbound, but we have a mix of people, a lot of them in Rhode Island. I would probably say 60% in Rhode Island, and then others, probably more than that, 75% in Rhode Island, and others from around the country, possibly the world. And so my follow-up question to that is, how might we as industry and community leaders stay motivated during these times? Optimism, I think, is a piece of it. But as we think about, leadership development or, the teams that we lead, or do you have any advice for us on staying motivated during these times?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult. And Dennis mentioned earlier a sense of purpose. And I think that there are a couple of, like, I know, Michelle, like, you're a facilitator, so you might be the only person on the planet who loves takeaways more than I do. So let me give you a couple of what I think are very actionable takeaways. So one of them is, for those of you who are still trying to lead people, who are still trying to manage people. One of the things you see when you look at the guts of how people lead is that they spend a lot of their time telling people how to do things. So in a traditional setting, here's how you do a presentation. Here's how you make a sales call. Here's how you do this. And they don't talk enough about why you're doing it in the first place. And there is a pile of evidence showing that if you actually surface that purpose, and the purpose could be a big transcendent purpose, like College Unbound, we're bringing college education to people who've been left out. Or it can be a smaller purpose of simply saying, hey, I'm just helping my teammate get a project out the door. If you surface that, you get people feeling better and doing better. And one simple technique for doing that, for those of you who are leading people, I think it's also true for educators as well, is, I'll give you a May Day off. So we'll start next Monday. Is next week, have 2 fewer conversations about how and 2 more about why. Just do that for 1 week. I've been trying this for a very long time. And what you find, if you're managing people, if you're leading people, if you're teaching people, if you're coaching people, is that you have a lot of how conversations. And so my advice is just twice in that week, stop. And when you're about to say, okay, here's how, stop. Turn it into a why conversation. Explain why you're doing something. And again, this is not some kind of, I mean, Michelle knows this, but this is not some kind of like namby-pamby, feeling-driven piece of advice. There is a pile of evidence in behavioral science showing that when people know the purpose of what they're doing, they do it better, they do it more independently, they do it more enduringly. So that's one very simple takeaway. Another thing that I do, what I've been not trying to do here, is, and again, it's built on some good evidence, is when you're stuck, when you have those moments, which all of us do these days, where you say, oh my God, like, okay, God, like, I'm not getting anything done. I got to get more done. Like, what's the point of this? Is actually what's called. I'll give you the professorial view, and then the actual useful thing. There's something in social science called construal levels. All right. So how do you construe a problem? How do you construe a situation? You can construe it on the abstract level, or you can construe it on the concrete level, and then various levels in between. Okay. So how do you construe a problem? And a lot of times when we construe things abstractly, it helps in our understanding, but it doesn't help in our ability to do stuff. And so one thing that I do, and literally I'm doing this week, In fact, no joke. I actually thought about it as we were waiting to start this call, which is this: picture one person your work can help. Picture one person your work can help. So you can take that kind of transcendent purpose. I am helping people understand their situation better, and say, picture one person your work can help. So before this call here, I said, you know what, I'm not sure who's going to be on here. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to be going. I like Michelle, I like Dennis, and and the work that they do is so important that I want to be behind this. But I'm not sure exactly how this is going to go. So what I thought about is, like, there could be one person on this call, and if I say one thing that helps that person get through the day, or get through the next week, or help out their kids, or do something different with their employees, that's a win for me. So, so those are 2 very specific things. 2 fewer conversations about how, 2 more about why. And then when you're stuck, picture one person what you're doing can help. Take it again, and I just want to understand. I want people to understand the theoretical basis of it, which is like if you think about things too abstractly, again, you understand stuff, but it can be an impediment to action. So what you want to be able to do is ride that ladder up and down, construe it abstractly, the theoretical principle side of it, but also be able to enact those in your day-to-day life. So those are two things that I frankly have been doing myself during this quarantine.
So interestingly enough, you went right to my next question. So you covered that. I have a little bit of a follow-up to that, and that is, do you have inspirational examples of where you've seen this in action?
Yeah, I mean, I think the inspirational examples are all over the place, especially now. I mean, it's things like, a 17-year-old friend of my, a 17-year-old friend of my son, who's also 17, put something on the neighborhood listservs to saying, hey, I'll go, if you can't go to the grocery store, I'll go pick up stuff for you. Like that's like picture one person you can help. And so what you have out there, and this is actually one of the things, again, looking at the other end of the telescope, all right? And I want to use that as a metaphor here, because a lot of times we have what's called, what social scientists would say, we have a negativity bias. Okay, we end up, and there's a reason for that. When there's bad stuff happening, for evolutionary purposes, we want to know when bad stuff is happening. So we're much more alert to bad stuff than we are to good stuff, because the bad stuff is a threat. And so when we're evolving on the savannah and there's a saber-toothed tiger over it, you're going to notice the saber-toothed tiger more than the pretty flower, because the saber-toothed tiger could eat us and we'll die. So we have in our brains a negativity bias. And I think it's important to look for, as we look for solutions, to look for bright spots. Look for things where things are actually going right, and there are. And I think that one of the things about the unmasking that we're seeing is that this country, Rhode Island included, is full of hidden heroes. And one of the things that bugs me about some of the narrative about public education is that it's always negative. It's always about how messed up it is. And there are some big problems with it. But what you also have is you have people who teach at the Met School. You have people in the Big Picture Learning Network. You have other educators all over the country who are doing incredible work. And so I think that one of the things that we can do to stay motivated is look for those hidden heroes, hope that this great unmasking exposes some of those hidden heroes, and do what we can to encourage them. Here's a small thing. I mean, I feel like an idiot sometimes. I'm not sure this is the right thing to do. Maybe you can give me some advice, Michelle. But I mean it. I'm dead serious about this. The times that, like, I have tried to thank, like the times I go into the grocery store, like I make sure what I say to the people working in the grocery store is, thank you very much for being here. Now I don't know whether that's the right thing to do or not, but it feels to me like the right thing to do. When I saw I was ending a run and I was walking and I saw a police officer, and I said to her, just walked by her and said, thanks a lot for doing your job here in these tough times. And I think that if nothing else, I don't know if it does anything for them, but what it does is it widens our eyes to the people, the hidden heroes out there. So I think that's the way to go. The other thing, though, I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish here, in that, when we have this great unmasking, we have all these things that are messed up. I think it requires serious collective action too. A nice point on May Day. It requires some amount of collective action. It requires people participating in local politics. It requires people voting. It requires a massive pushback to those who are trying to make voting more difficult. It requires people paying attention and taking care of each other. So good feelings alone won't do it. But it requires, I'm hoping that this moment will be a stir to, the serious kinds of collective action that we've seen at other points in American history, where circumstances get to the point where we say, we got to do better than this. And that could be the progressive era in the early 1900s. It could be the New Deal later on. But I think we are at a possibility of that right now, but it requires, every individual to step up.
Thank you for that. I am certainly inspired. What I'm going to do right now is just take a pause and ask if in the chat, if you have a question.
Yeah.
I do have a third question for you that I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll answer, but I want to just give an opportunity for the group to ask questions. And I ask you to just type it in the chat if possible first, and then we'll certainly have you unmute. It's just hard to everybody to unmute and then ask questions over each other.
Yeah. And if it's better, and again, for the folks, for the millions of you watching this on Zoom, if it's more useful to you to say, to have like very specific, concrete, like, what, I can offer whatever insight I can on that, like even things like suddenly I'm working at home, like how do I organize my day? I mean, there's no,
Well, that goes into my third question.
Yeah.
So while I'll monitor the chat, I don't see anything right now, but my third question actually is very much related to that. So many people, myself included, have been furloughed or laid off from their full-time jobs. For others, work is 100% at home and work-life balance is now blurred. So before I ended up being furloughed, I was full-time work from home, and I had worked from home before, but it was so overwhelming. In your book, When, you talk about timing and patterns and intrinsic motivation toward activity and also creative times of the day. And also the effects of the time of day on performance. So in our new normal, have you had thoughts about how this plays out in 2020, and then maybe thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, let's be super practical about this. So here's what we know. There is in many ways a hidden pattern of the day that has a big effect on our mood and a big effect on our performance. And typically we move through the day, about 80% of us move through the day in this order: a peak early in the day, a trough in the middle of the day, and a recovery period late in the day. Peak, trough, recovery. Now about 20% of us don't abide by that. 20% of us are night owls, people who have what's called, chronobiologists call an evening chronotype. They naturally wake up late and go to sleep late. Those folks are much more complicated. Those folks hit their peak much, much later in the day. Okay, so we have these three stages of a day: peak, trough, recovery. Here's what we know. During the peak, which for most of us is early in the day, that's when we are most vigilant. That's when we are most vigilant. What does it mean to be vigilant? Vigilant means you're able to bat away distractions. So that makes, according to this, again, I'm skipping the science part of it, but just imagine this, a foundation of science here. That makes the peak the best time for what social psychologists call analytic work. Analytic work is simply work that requires heads down, focus, and attention. All right, writing a report, analyzing data, going step by step over a strategy. Those of you on the call who are writers know that at the moment that you sit down to write, your butt hits the seat, your fingers hit the keyboard, the whole universe begins conspiring for ways to distract you. So you want to do your writing at your moment of highest vigilance, least distractibility. For most of us, that's early in the day during the peak. During the trough, early to mid-afternoon, we joke about it. I need some sugar. I need some coffee. The evidence is overwhelming. That is a terrible time of day. There are huge decrements in performance all across the board, in education, in corporate performance, especially in healthcare. And so what you want to do during that middle part of the day when you're at your worst is do your administrative work, answering routine emails, filling out expense reports. Then recovery period is a very interesting period for most of us. Late in the afternoon, early in the evening, our mood is back up, but our vigilance is not. So that makes it a good time for what are called insight problems. Those are problems with non-obvious solutions, iterating new ideas, divergent thinking, coming up with solutions to non-obvious problems. And so we have a recipe for 80% of it, which is this. During your peak, early in the day, do your analytic work, heads down, focused work. During the trough, that middle period of the day, do your administrative work. During the recovery, late afternoon, early evening, do things like brainstorming, iterating new ideas, things that require more creativity. Now, if you're a night owl though, the main thing, you're more complicated. If you're a night owl, you're a much more complicated human being than I am. If you're a night owl, you want to do your heads down analytic work in the evening, early evening, mid-evening, late into the evening. And a lot of corporate structures don't allow that very well. So what we have is a set of design principles: analytic in the peak, administrative in the trough, insight in the recovery. And unfortunately, we don't do that. You know, I don't do that. You know, for years, the first thing I did when I came into my office was check my email when I should be writing. I have this very small period of day when I'm hyper vigilant, and I squandered a third of it by answering email. So that's some tips on how you can, if you have a little bit more sovereignty over your day. You know, and the main point here is that our brain power doesn't remain constant over the course of a day. It changes. It changes in material ways. And so you can get a little extra edge if you do the right stuff, right stuff at the right time. And what I would say, again, recognizing that it's very difficult out there, particularly with people who have little kids at home, is also, you know, go for small wins. Go for small wins. So the idea is, so it's, I'm saying, oh, do all your analytic work during that peak period. If you've got like 2 or 3 little kids running around and you have to do analytic work, if you get an hour during the morning to do that focus work, that's a victory. Declare victory over that. Go for those small wins. But we do have this set. But the point is that we have this set of design principles where you'll get more work done and better work done if you move to do the right work at the right time.
Thank you for that. So we have quite a few questions in the chat.
All right, bring them.
All right. I don't know how much time. I know you had told us you would be able to attend for.
No, this is good. I'm enjoying. You know.
Okay.
Because the thing is, if I stop here, Michelle, I have to start writing, and that's just too painful.
All right.
So now I won't get any writing done today, but I'll blame you and Dennis.
But your purpose has
affected
many of us. Actually, I know from the chat that there are people here from around the world. So
cool.
So you've affected at least, I think I saw that we were up to 95 people today. So
rock and roll. Rock and roll.
So you've affected 95
but seriously, I'm happy to take a couple more questions, and then you guys can go off and do because I know you have other parts of the agenda here too.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of application of what your discussion was and how do we apply it. So one of the questions, and I forgive me that I can't get to them all. And what I'm trying to do is focus on some that really spoke to some of the things that you talked about. So I got one privately, which says the great unmasking has revealed inequities, vulnerabilities, and the crude reality that we have ignored. As we move forward, how do we move forward? How do students return to school? How do we facilitate a path forward? That's a big question.
That's a huge question. Yeah. That's a huge question. You know, on that one, so I'll give you sort of different level. I think there are different levels of that. I think at this point it's extremely important that we have the kind of conversations that we're having right now. And that people continue these kinds of conversations. I've always believed for years and years and years that everything good begins with a conversation. Every great business idea, every great social movement, every great love affair begins with a conversation. I'm sure that College Unbound, I don't know the genesis, the specific genesis, but I'm sure College Unbound began with a conversation. And so I think it's important to have conversations about these kinds of things. And when it comes to education, I think you can have some conversations that have sort of a loose, tight structure. For instance, I think there's a really important question right now that you see bubbling out there in schools, which is this ferocious battle, and it has a heavy class tinge to it as well, about grades. So here we have this moment when kids are learning from home, and should we have grades? Should things be graded? Should it be pass fail? And I think that it's like, they're respectable people have different points of view on it, but it offers a great conversation about, okay, what's the point of grades? And more important, even deeper than that, how do we give kids feedback that helps them learn? And I think that we don't do a very good job of that. And so that's a great conversation to have. I think there's also something to be said, like with education, and I think, and one of the things that it's unmasking is when we have this, and it's true in companies too. We have this this kind of premise, this sort of almost like muscle memory, that things that are done synchronously with other people are the best way to do stuff. So we all, of course, have to have our kids in class together in real time all the time, because God forbid. And again, I'm agnostic. I'm just raising the issue. It's like, I think there's a lot of room for asynchronous learning. and you know, big picture schools are in some ways like that, because each kid goes off on his or her own to do his or her own thing, rather than do everything in concert and lockstep with other kids. So how do we evaluate kids? How do we what should be synchronous and what should be asynchronous? What are we going to do about these? You know, it's a hard problem, but it begins with a conversation. What are we going to do about these incredible inequities? And I think about this all the time living in DC. My kids, you know, because they happen to be born in this neighborhood to my wife and me from the get-go, have huge advantages over kids who are just as capable, just as smart, who had the misfortune of being born to different parents in a neighborhood literally 3.5 miles in that direction. What are we going to do? You know, what are we going to do about that? So again, I think this offers us some time to start having these kinds of conversations. The other thing that I would do is that one of the things you see in these kinds of wacky times is that it offers room for individual experimentation. I don't want to put too much of the onus on teachers, because I think teachers' jobs have gotten even harder. But teachers have an opportunity to experiment here, because to some extent you're flying underneath the radar. Your principal's not going to come in. You know, principal's probably not going to Zoom bomb you. So you can try stuff with your classes. You can maybe be a little bit more subversive, a little bit more experimental. And let me just go back to one bigger point here, Michelle, which is this, and it's something that I think about, or try to think about a lot, is that, you know, like, I wake up sometimes. I mean, I wake up every day. I wake up sometimes, and sometimes when I wake up, I'm like the last person in America who gets physical newspapers. We get 3 physical newspapers delivered to our house here in Washington. And I look at the newspaper, and after about 15 minutes, I just shake my head. And I'm like, oh my God. You know, and at some level, I feel stymied by that, because I feel like the problems are so deep and so bad. And then I realize, like, okay, here's the thing. If I ask myself the question, can I change everything? The answer is absolutely no. But over time, I've realized that's the wrong answer. That's the wrong answer. And the right answer is the right question. I'm sorry, the wrong question. The right question is not, can I change everything? But can I do one small thing today to make things a little bit better? And the answer to that question is always yes. The answer to that question is always yes. I can send an email to my friend at the ACLU and say, I'm so proud of what you're doing, bringing this lawsuit, trying to stop this stuff. I can go give blood because I'm a healthy dude. I can go give blood or something like that. I can walk by a fire station and thank the first responders who are there. And so there's always something that we can do in our own. So we have to ask the right question. And if we all ask ourselves, can I do something, one thing in my world today to make things a little bit better? The answer is always yes.
Thank you for that. So there's so many good questions. It's hard to figure out. I want to, Lauren was our host for our January event when we engaged business leaders, kind of the kickstart of this year with regard to our connection with College Unbound. So I'm going to go to Lauren's question, because I think it speaks specifically to what you're saying, which is find ways to make a difference. So Lauren, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or I can certainly ask it?
So Dan, thanks so much for
Hey,
joining.
Yeah,
So I'm initiating an effort I'm calling Rhode Island United.
Okay.
And basically the idea is hospitality and tourism and so on and so forth is the second biggest industry in Rhode Island. But it also happens to be one that, you know, each of 1 million Rhode Islanders can contribute to restoring by doing takeouts, by having friends come visit from New York instead of being in a crowded subway in New York, you know, by staying at a hotel we haven't stayed at in Rhode Island, by, you know, visiting things that we haven't visited in Rhode Island. So the question, the opportunity is to take this energy that people have put into committing to doing the right thing. As you said earlier, everybody in Rhode Island is doing the right thing, they're staying home. But how do we continue, get that esprit de corps and put it on to the next challenge of let's together restore this industry, which is so important to so many Rhode Islanders. And what are the subtle things that we ought to be thinking about in inspiring people to contribute to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, again, I don't think I have any great advice on like specific concrete things that Rhode Island United can do right now. But I think there's a general principle of it, which I think sometimes we often overlook, which is make it easy for people to do it. So if you tell me, hey, Dan, you should really vacation in Rhode Island, that's nice. But if you send me, here are 5 amazing things you can do in Rhode Island, I'm more likely to do it. So again, so just like make it easy for people to do stuff. That is a fundamental principle of behavior change that we often overlook. We spend a lot of our time trying to change people's minds in the hope that they act, but what we're better off doing is making it easy for people to do things. Because the dirty little secret is, again, you know, I'm sorry I'm going back into this research stuff, but literally, like, I'm working on some project right now that is like have my head totally in research. Is that what we tend to think is this? That it works this way: you change people's minds, and then they change their behavior, and that's true sometimes. But what we don't realize is that the dirty little secret is that if you change people's behavior, that often changes their minds. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to make it easy for people to change their behavior. You see this in environmental stuff. You can harangue people about how important it is to recycle or compost or okay? And they won't do it. But if you put the composting thing or the recycling bin at a convenient spot with clear signage and it's easy, suddenly everybody's recycling. And then what happens, but here's the part we often overlook. When people start recycling, they start believing in environmental responsibility because they want to be consistent with themselves. And so, anyway, Lauren, it's a long-winded way of saying, like, think about what can you do to make it as easy for people to take a trip to Rhode Island, to buy a trip for a loved one to Rhode Island, to, you know, get people to Rhode Island, to, you know, anything like that, I think is the key. Like, what can you do to remove the obstacles in the way of people doing what you want them to do? In some ways, that is more valuable than, you know, an ingenious, brilliant, sparkling advertising campaign.
Absolutely fabulous. And something you said a moment ago, what of these, you know, 5 simple things might you do today?
Yeah, exactly. Make it easy to act. Exactly. I think that's exactly right. Make it easy to act. Make it easy to act today. The other thing, I mean, this is more. You know, like I mean, you already know this, Lauren, but it's more like sort of, you know, modern marketing 101, which is, you know, what you want to do is you want to actually be able to begin a conversation with people. You want to get their permission to have this conversation. You want them to be able to opt in to be hearing from you. You want your marketing to be informative and so forth, rather than like buy. I think as an organizing principle, making it easy for people to do things is undervalued.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are so many good questions. And what I'm going to ask is a little bit of a personal question. I'm going to reframe a question that someone asked, which was around writing a book and getting unstuck. So maybe if you don't mind sharing how did you begin this journey of writing these books and inspiring so many people? How did it start for you?
Oh boy.
I didn't send you that question. Sorry.
So well, I mean, I don't want to bore people, and I'll give you. I want to answer this question about getting unstuck because I think it might be more universally useful. But I will answer that question, Michelle. Basically, what happened is this, and I think you can extract a lesson from it. So I grew up in the Midwest. Went to college on financial aid. Did well in college, but was, you know, this middle class, fairly risk-averse guy. So I went to law school because that was the thing that you're supposed to do. I didn't really like law school, decided that I didn't want to practice law. What I really liked was politics. So I ended up working in politics, worked as a speechwriter for a while, and then realized, like in my early 30s, that I didn't want to be working politics the rest of my life. Now, then the other thing though was this. From the time that I was basically like 16, I was always quote unquote writing on the side. So I would write magazine articles or newspaper columns or things like that. In college, I was this hardcore mathematical social science major. I won a short story prize for writing short stories. So I totally orthogonal to anything that I was doing. When I was in law school, I actually spent more time writing newspaper op-eds than I did writing my law school papers. Even when I was working in politics, I was writing stuff but I was always doing it on the side. And finally, after years and years of doing this, my wife said, well, here you are working these demanding jobs in politics, but at midnight, you're at the computer writing an article for free because you can't get paid under ethics laws. You're doing something on top of your demanding job that's difficult, and you're doing it for free. I think you might like this. And so that's when I decided to try to become a writer full time. Again, my wife didn't leave her job; she didn't give up her health insurance. But the life lesson, such as it is, that I extract from that is as follows. I hate the question, what's your passion? I hate that question. I hate that question. I hate that question. I hate that question. I despise that question.
Do you hate that question?
I would like to drive a stake through the heart of that question. Because I think it's a really hard question to ask. Someone asked me that question, I feel like I have to have a really good answer. And I often don't. But I think it's the wrong question. I think the question is, what do you do when nobody's watching? Like, what do you do? And what it turned out that I did is that I wrote. And so what do you do? So maybe like in Lauren's example, maybe like you're working at a job and it's not that exciting to you, but what you really like doing is throwing parties for people or having people over for dinner. And that's what you do. That's what you focus on. You like that's what you do. So that's a clue about your past. So that's how I got into writing. It's what I did. It's like, if you ask me, is writing your passion? I would say no fucking way, because it's really, really, because it's really, really hard. It's really, really hard. There are days that I'm miserable being a writer, but it's what I do. All right. So on the question of getting unstuck, more important, more universally relevant question for people here. You're not allowed to get stuck. And I'll tell you why. All right. Because your job as a writer is to show up. All right, whether you feel like it or not. And so let me give you what I discovered and what I do now as a writer. I will come into my office at a certain time, usually not super early, around 8:30, and I will give myself a word count. 600 words, 800 words, whatever, not massive. And I will not do anything else until I hit that word count. I will not open my email. I don't bring my phone with me into the office. I won't even watch ESPN highlights. I won't take a phone call, won't do anything until I hit that number. And there are some days where I hit my number at 10:30. There's some days where I don't hit my number until 12:30 or 2:30 or 1:30, but at 3:30, but it doesn't make a difference, because every day I show up and I do my job. If I waited until I was inspired to write, I would never write a word. So I'm stuck all the time, and being stuck is part of the process. The way to get unstuck is to show up and do your work, whether you like it or not. And so what I do is, what I think of as writing, I don't think of writing as some exalted thing. I think of it more of like building. I think of it as like a building trades profession. What I do is I build walls. And so how do you build a wall? It takes a long time to build a wall. So what do? I show up. I'm a bricklayer, basically. I show up on Monday and I lay 2 or 3 bricks. I show up on Tuesday, I lay 2 or 3 more bricks, right? Make sure that the mortar in between is smooth, right? Show up on Wednesday, lay 2 bricks. Show up on Thursday, realize that the bricks that I've laid before are a little bit off, so I remove one. I redo part of it, lay 2 more bricks, all right? You do that every single day. You just show up and do your job. and say, I don't have the luxury, the indulgence of being stuck, you get stuff done. So that's how I do it. Forgive, that sounded like an old man ranting, which is sort of what it was, but forgive, that's my answer.
I will hear that in my ear, I think, as I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing these days.
You're not
So
allowed, that's what I say to writers. You're not allowed to get stuck. Don't tell me about writer's block. Don't tell me about stuck, you know? Show up and do your job. And sometimes doing your job, like all of our jobs, everybody on this call, sometimes our jobs are really, 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 really hard. And you know what? You show up and you do your work, you know. I mean, Dennis knows that I'm a big basketball fan, and there's a great line from Julius Erving, the former Philadelphia 76ers star who started in the ABA for the Virginia Squires, who says something like being a professional is doing your job even on the days you don't like feeling, even on the days you don't like feeling, even the days you don't feel like doing your job. That's what being a professional is. You show up and you do your frickin' work.
That's what I'm going to quote.
And you kids get off my lawn.
I'm going to quote Daniel Pink all the time. Now I'm going to quote not just your books, but your talk. So just show up and do your work.
Yeah.
All right. Unfortunately, I think this is one of the fastest hours I've had in about a month. Yeah. So that's
I'll let you guys thank you for indulging my rants, Michelle. So I'll let you guys go to your breakouts and your application thing, because application is, you know, as we talked about, like, I really think if people can figure out like one thing different to do, then that's a win. It really is.
We appreciate this. Thank you. You are more than welcome to stay. We've only got about 7 minutes left, so I'm gonna do two things at once. What I'd like to do, thank you so much, Daniel, for coming and spending your hour with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for indulging my rants.
We did too. What I'd like everyone to do is, now we're going to think about how do we apply this, is just type something in the chat that you'll do differently after today, after our 10 o'clock call today. Just type something in the chat. And then what I'd also like to do is have Dennis just do a little bit of a quick discussion about College Unbound and what we're going to plan for the rest of the year.
All right. So he was great. My one thing for today, as soon as we're off and I take my daily walk, I'm taking it in my Santa outfit to cheer people up. So I'll be walking around the streets in my Santa outfit. So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So this is my great time to just finish, to push College Unbound. The surprise is that we are announcing today that in our hope and our way to help everyone, we are offering a free course to anybody this summer. That's our present students, that's new students, that's anybody that just says, oh, I could use a course. So we have like 10 courses, from a writing course to a meditation course to a contextualizing COVID course to your career in the new normal that Michelle and Julie DeBari are going to be teaching. So go to our website and you can just sign up for that. And we're starting June 8th. In 2 weeks, we have Don Stanford, who is one of the founders of GTech, coming on with us because we're trying to go local now. And GTech's now IGT for you youngsters. And we'll be able to do the same kind of thing. So I just want to end with sign up for a course. The other thing is, when Dan was talking about one thing, there are 113,000 people in Rhode Island who started college and didn't finish. If you have a friend, a relative that's stuck, help them get unstuck. We have a very personalized program. Even though it's online and offline, we go back and forth. Get one person who you know and help them get unstuck. So I just want to end with a Winston Churchill quote: a major crisis is too good to waste. So everyone go out, do their one thing, sign up for College Unbound, help somebody get unstuck. Santa says, Happy May Day.
Santa says, that's the only time you'll ever hear that. Santa says Happy May Day. So I've been looking at the chat, and we're gonna, what we'd like to do, so I don't want any of those questions that people had to go unnoticed. What we'd like to do is find ways to get answers to those questions for you. So we will go back to this. And then I think all of the takeaways that we have, we'll also, if anybody is interested, we will send those out as well. So that way we'll send them out. We don't have to apply names to them, but just say, these are all the things that people committed to after our 10 o'clock. And I think that will inspire us. So before I close, we've got about 4 minutes. Does anyone have questions for Dennis or others on the call before we close? And you can unmute to do that if you'd like. So this has been recorded, and as Daniel was speaking, I kept thinking, I should have had my 17-year-old here. I should have had my 17-year-old here. So yes, there is a recording that we will send out that Dan has said he has no problem with us sharing. So isn't that wonderful? All right. I just see lots of, okay. I do have a question for you, Dennis, which is, how does College Unbound's model shift during the pandemic?
So the beautiful thing about College Unbound is it has a strong 3-hour meeting each week of a cohort that gets very close to each other. Nice dog, Michelle. Move a little more to your right so we don't see your dog. There we go. Okay. And then they have courses on the ground and have courses online. So the beautiful shift was we didn't miss a beat because people had relationships with the other 15 people, with their faculty. When we went online for that cohort, our attendance even went up. Everybody was there because they wanted to see their people. So we're going to watch what they say in Rhode Island. Can we get together with 5? Can we get together with 10? And our whole program is going to be moving back and forth. And a lot of it is built around an individual student's project. So they do a lot of work on their own. They have a purpose, they have autonomy to do it. So it's an exciting program that we've talked to other colleges have called us to kind of follow that model. So thanks for the question.
Another question I got was, can high schoolers attend classes over the summer? So I think that meant if they were graduating as well. Yeah.
One of the things we're thinking about is that somewhere between 20 and 40% of graduating seniors, they think, are deciding not to go away to college. So what are they going to do? Okay. They may get a job someplace. They may take a course or two, but how do we make something meaningful? So we've been thinking about how to partner with AmeriCorps City Year so these students can have a great gap year here in Rhode Island. They can be helping other schools, other organizations, and we can partner with them to start doing the reflection and the depth to be able to give people college credit. So that's something we're just kind of playing with, looking for a grant for that. But that could be a way to make that gap year at home helpful for neighbors helping neighbors, and helpful to keep kids involved and keeping their minds working. So great question.
And then one more came through, and we still have a minute left. So is College Unbound open for international students or even teachers?
Great question. Right now, we're just doing it for people in Rhode Island. We have a plan to expand around the world. Big picture, last night we were on a Zoom with people from 27 different countries. So it's very exciting. But right now, we're just doing Rhode Island. And the second part of the question, international and what did you say? That's a good enough answer, I guess.
It was also teachers, so.
Yeah, we don't have a master's program now, but we're talking about partnering. We're also talking about how to help teacher assistants become the teachers in the Providence schools. So you hear all our ideas now. Now we got to do them.
So with that, I would like to close this. So I have to say, selfishly, this has been such a highlight for me, and I needed this. So thank you to everyone who attended. You know, we will follow up, and So you have a wonderful May Day. This is the beginning of the best month of the year.